Dr. Davidson's far-sighted administration has led us into a very prosperous era. His visions for higher education has resulted in a national reputation for the University of Georgia in the areas of instruction, research, and public service. And we'd like to thank Dr. Davidson for his continuous support of the law school. Dr. Davidson.
Thank you, Ms. Fallon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the University of Georgia and to this celebration of Law Day 1984. The primary purpose of this observance is to emphasize the value of living under a system of laws and legal traditions which do make possible a free society. We have in this nation a carefully and sometimes painfully crafted system of laws which indeed does provide a remarkable framework in which individual freedom and individual responsibility can flourish. The American dream of living up to one's full potential has a good chance of success under our system, and it's aided by our efforts in education. The University of Georgia, through its teaching, research, and service programs, has a long history of supporting the principles which we celebrate today. It's indeed appropriate that a nationwide observance of Law Day be localized in this lovely outdoor setting in an educational institution whose mission is to inquire and to seek after knowledge. I congratulate the School of Law on its 125th anniversary celebration this year. I certainly agree with you on your selection of Senator Sam Nunn as the keynote speaker, and I join with you in looking forward to his remarks. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
The Student Service and Academic Awards will be presented this morning by the Dean of the Law School, J. Ralph Beard. During the past 10 years, Dean Beard has done more for this legal institution than any other single individual has in its history. His efforts are reflected in our physical facilities, the quality of the faculty and the students, and the reputation of the law school community as a whole. Dean Beard's job is not an easy one, and his work is never done. Dean Beard.
Thank you very much, Leah. I want to join the President in welcoming each of you to this celebration of Law Day 1984. The custom of observing Law Day began 27 years ago when May 1 was set aside as a special day of celebration by the American people in appreciation of their liberties and the affirmation of their loyalty to the United States of America. This year, our Law Day program is 2 weeks earlier than the traditional time, which is the Saturday closest to May 1. This is because the school converted to the semester system this year and placed the end of our classes and exam schedule at the end of April and the first week of May. Scheduling Law Day then would work a hardship on the people that are most important to Law Day, our student body and their family and friends. For our purpose here at the University of Georgia School of Law, this annual celebration has also become an occasion when we review the academic year and assemble into one place the highlights which have made our mission in legal education a fruitful one this year. We look inwardly at the academic achievements of our fine students, and we look outwardly at the active level of support by our alumni and friends. The year 1984 marks the 125th anniversary of the founding of the University of Georgia School of Law. It is appropriate that this year's celebration of Law Day commemorate the beginning of the Lumpkin Law School and the commitment of the state of Georgia to a formal program of legal education. The guests assembled on the pavilion this morning are testimony to the state occasion which Law Day at the University of Georgia has become. I won't introduce them all, for each one is a distinguished guest in his or her own right. I will simply point out that sitting on the pavilion this morning with some of our students to be honored, we have representatives of the executive branch of Georgia's government, the legislative branch, our federal court system, our state court system, federal legislative branch, state legislative branch, local government representatives, and the University System Board of Regents. We're particularly happy to have with us the Chancellor of the system, Vernon Crawford. I will ask Vernon to stand and receive your welcome. Law Day is a time when we call to mind the values and standards of our system of justice. This system is one of strength and integrity because the legal profession, which serves as its guardian, is today more than ever committed to a high level of professional responsibility. It is a self-disciplined profession. This morning we pause to recognize the academic self-discipline which it takes to achieve excellence in legal studies. We are proud of the accomplishments of each of these student award recipients, and we are pleased that each of you came to share in this honors program. First will be the McDougall Award. This award is presented to the first honor graduate of the School of Law for the class of 1984. This is a cash award for the Jesse and Dan McDougall Memorial Fund of the University of Georgia Foundation, and this year it goes to Harriet M. Deal, who finished first in her class. Harriet, after graduating, took a job as law clerk to Judge Van Graffelen of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in Rochester, New York. She'd planned to be with us today, but she was taken to the hospital 2 days ago for a tonsillectomy and is unable to be here. But she receives the award, the McDougall Award, as the first honor graduate of her class. The Meinhardt Award also goes to Harriet Deal. This award recognizes the student who has maintained the highest academic average on all work completed throughout her course of study at the University of Georgia School of Law. And as I indicated, the recipient is Harriet Deal. She has asked us, since this is a cash award, to give the award to the Legal Environmental Assistance Foundation, a public service law firm established last year in Atlanta, and we will honor her wishes and forward the award to that law firm. The first award, established as a means of recognizing scholastic achievement in a particular subject area, was the Torts Award, sponsored by the class of 1933. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the class and its award, and the Georgia Advocate published, Ham Lokey, who happens to be class historian, published his account of how the class of 1933 decided to establish this award. Ham wanted to be here today to make the award, but he's on an expedition to the North Pole. Ham, at 75, has climbed Kilimanjaro, gone to the South Pole, and he wanted to make his record complete, and he's now somewhere between Atlanta and the North Pole. Since there's 3 sections in the first year torts class, 3 persons receive this award. They are Gerald Pouncey, Valerie Robbins, and Laura H. Robinson. Gerald is not here, but Valerie and Laura are. If they'll come forward, I'll give them this award. Congratulations. Oh, make sure you got the right one. Wait a minute. Gotta get a picture. The Georgia Municipal Association has established an award which recognizes achievement in the study of the law of municipal corporations. The cash award goes to the student who earned the highest grade in the municipal corporations course offered each year. Representing the GMA today are James V. Burgess, the Executive Director of the Georgia Municipal Association, and Ed Sumner, a 1976 Georgia law graduate and General Counsel of GMA. If they'll come forward, I'll ask them to present the award to Sidney O. Smith, Jr. Sidney? Sidney is the son of Sidney O. Smith, Sr., a graduate of this law school, a senior partner in Alston and Bird, and currently vice chairman of the University System Board of Regents. We're also very proud of the fact that the current president of the Georgia Municipal Association is Bob Knox of Thompson, who's a graduate of this law school. Winning this award is not easy since the course is taught by R. Perry Centel. Our next award is one which recognizes excellence in the study of the law of corporate reorganization. This award is given by the Atlanta law firm of Zusman, Small, Stamps, and White. This time I will ask Sam Zusman, a member of the class of 1954, to come forward to congratulate the recipient. Sam also is the current chairman of the law school's Board of Visitors. The award winner this year is J. Randolph Evans. Randy? Congratulations. You're not going to say anything, are you?
No, I don't want to understand.
Randy is a 1983 graduate of the law school and now practices with the firm of Bondrit, Miller, Hishon, and Stevenson in Atlanta. He was a member of last year's National Moot Court team, the team that engaged in a series of moots with Gray's Inn in London, as well as finishing third in national competition. The bankruptcy award is given by the law firm of Macy and Sykes. Frank Walensky, representing that firm, will come forward and congratulate the winner, who is Bert King. Bert? Bert, congratulations. This award represents the person who received the highest grades in the course taught by Walter Ray Phillips. The Donald P. Gilmore Jr. Memorial Award for Excellence in the Study of Labor Law was established 2 years ago. It is named for Don Gilmore, a Georgia law graduate of the class of 1974. He was a staff attorney with the Labor Law Division, Office of the General Counsel, U.S. Postal Service at the time of his death in the crash of the Air Florida jetliner on the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River in January 1982. Many friends of Don Gilmore sent memorial tributes in the form of gifts to the law school, and these gifts became the endowment of the Gilmore Labor Law Award. We're very pleased to have present here today Don's parents. I would like at this time for Mr. and Mrs. Donald Gilmore Sr. to stand and receive our welcome. Mr. and Mrs. Gilmore. The recipient of the Gilmore Labor Law Award is Dean Marshall. Dean? Congratulations. Thank you. I don't know. I'll have to see you later. I got it here someplace. Dean is currently the notes editor of the Georgia Law Review and is going to clerk for judge on the 11th Circuit in Macon upon graduation. The Georgia Association of Women Lawyers established an award to recognize an outstanding woman graduate in each of the 3 Georgia law schools. The honoree receives a complimentary membership in the association for the year following her graduation, as well as a certificate of citation. The outstanding woman law student at the University of Georgia was chosen by a Faculty Student Bar Association committee from among a list of nominees submitted by the Women's Law Student Association. Here to represent the Georgia Association of Women Lawyers is Virginia Garrett, an attorney from Douglasville, and the recipient is Dorinda Dahlmeyer. I would like to acknowledge the presence today of Mrs. Harmon Caldwell. One of the bicentennial projects of the law school is to endow a chair in constitutional law honoring former dean, former president, former chancellor Harmon Caldwell. And I'm delighted to announce that as a result of a substantial gift, the corpus of that fund has now reached $158,000 toward a goal of $250,000. Mrs. Caldwell, she's out in the audience. There she is. There she is. Two years ago, the law school was the beneficiary of a substantial gift from Mr. John Bird Martin, a 1936 graduate of the law school who had spent much of his career in the Air Force and later practiced law in the District of Columbia. Mr. Martin left his estate to endow a chair in the law school, and we have now, after administering the state and receiving the proceeds, named the person to serve as the first John Bird Martin Professor of Evidence, and I hope he's in the audience. It's Ron Carlson, formerly of Washington University, soon to be with the University of Georgia Law School. Ron, is he here? He's out there someplace, or he's buying a house, one or the other. This time I'll turn the program back to Leah Fowler. Thank you.
The annual Faculty Service Awards will be presented this morning by Lene Dover Spike. Lene is the SBA chairperson for Law Day 1984.
Law Day is also an occasion where the students get to recognize certain faculty members that they think deserve special recognition. There are two awards. One is a Professional Responsibility Award that is sponsored by the Young Lawyers section of the Georgia Bar. And to assist me in presenting this award is Ken Malden, a 1980 graduate of the University of Georgia and a member of the Younger Lawyers section. Ken? The winner of this award, or by a vote of the student body, is Professor Walter Ray Phillips. Professor Phillips is the Joseph Henry Lumpkin Professor of Law. He's been an instructor here at the university since 1973. He teaches courses such as civil procedure, legal professions, and corporate finance, among others. His name has been inscribed on this plaque below his name from winning the award last year. And the plaque says, "In recognition of that professor who best succeeds in the teaching of professional responsibility and service to the community within his class, the Younger Lawyers section of the Georgia State Bar Association and the Student Bar Association of the University of Georgia School of Law proudly confer this annual Professional Responsibility Award upon Walter Ray Phillips." This plaque will be hung in the law school, and he's received a plaque that has his name inscribed that he'll hang in his office. Another award is voted on by the entire student body, and it's the Student Bar Association Faculty Book Award. This award is to the faculty member who most effectively conveys his knowledge and understanding of what the law is and inspires his students to think analytically and critically about what the law can become. And the winner of this year's Faculty Book Award for the second year in a row is Professor Ellington, who's been a professor at Georgia since 1969. He's the T.R.R. Cobb Professor of Law since 1983. Professor Ellington.
Our speaker for the day will be introduced by Melissa Burkholder. Melissa is a third-year law student at the University of Georgia, and I might also add she's a former intern of Senator Nunn's. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today the Honorable Senator Sam Nunn. Senator Nunn is from Perry, Georgia. He attended Georgia Tech as an undergraduate and then the Emory Law School, which we won't hold against him since he has surrounded himself with University of Georgia Law School graduates in his office. He graduated from that school with honors, and he later, several years later, served in the Georgia House of Representatives from 1968 until 1972. Sam Nunn began his service to the state of Georgia as U.S. Senator on November 8, 1972, when he was elected to fill the unexpired term of Senator Richard Russell. Now in his 12th year of service, Sam Nunn has established a reputation in Washington as an intelligent, hard-working senator whose thoroughness in dealing with major national issues and the problems of his constituents has become the hallmark of his career. Senator Nunn currently serves on the Armed Services Committee, Governmental Affairs Committee, Intelligence Committee, and Small Business Committee. He is the ranking minority member on the Armed Services Committee and the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Perhaps the best assessment of his tenure in the Senate can be found in what others have had to say about him. For example, the New York Times has said his relative youth, his shrewd analytic bent in defense matters, and a streak of independence have made Sam Nunn one of the most formidable and intriguing figures in Congress. Further, the Wall Street Journal has reported that Senator Nunn wields as much power as anyone in the Senate on military issues, and his influence is widening. He is a steady in achieving power and influence in that competitive Senate chamber. Further, the United Press International says Senator Nunn is the Senate's E.F. Hutton when it comes to defense. When the 44-year-old Georgia pecan farmer speaks, people listen. Without further ado, let me introduce to you Senator Sam Nunn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa, Leah, who was also an intern of mine, Chancellor Crawford, Dr. Davidson, Dr. Dean Beard, Speaker Murphy, members of the legislature who are here today, students, faculty, alumni. I'm delighted to have a chance to escape Washington after one of the most hectic weeks we've had in several years and to join you on Law Day here at the University of Georgia in your great law school. Coming from an all-night session Thursday night, we got through 5 in the morning, to this refreshing academic atmosphere. Even though we were busy making law, I think you can truly appreciate the foundation of law here in Athens, Georgia at the university, much more than those kind of sessions in the United States Senate. So I'm delighted to have a chance to be with you. I have had some outstanding graduates of the University of Georgia and students of the University of Georgia that have served with me in Washington. My head legislative assistant now is Randy Knuckles, who's here today, and Randy was a proud graduate of your law school. Also, Melissa and Leah and many others have worked, so I know the quality of the product you're turning out here. I must admit that I came from a little bit different era than the present era in the legal practice, where everyone keeps up meticulously with every minute spent for every client and makes the appropriate billing. I heard a story the other day, though, that even that practice can be a little bit dangerous, about a young lawyer who was in his mid-30s. All of a sudden he died and went to pearly gates. He was confronted by St. Peter. He said, "St. Peter, I don't understand it. I've been out of law school only about 9 or 10 years. I've just been made a partner in my firm. My career's at the peak. I'm a young man. I was in good health. I do not understand why I was called so early." St. Peter said, "Wait a minute, let me look at your file." So he went back and got the file, and he said, "Young man, I don't know. We must have made some mistake. We've looked at your client time billing chart, and it shows you're 115 years old." So there are certain hazards to the modern practice of law. The University of Georgia trustees set their sights high in 1859 when they voted to establish a law school. Quoting them, they set out to create a law school in which facilities for the best legal education would be afforded. Thanks to the efforts of several generations of faculty, students, administrators, and our own state of Georgia, this commitment to educational excellence in legal terms has been fulfilled to the highest order. As a Georgian, I'm proud of this law school, and I'm proud of its graduates. Today, the University of Georgia's law school and its reputation and its influence reaches far beyond our state borders and even beyond our national borders, with prestigious leaders such as Dean Rusk, Ralph Beard, Thomas Schoenbaum, Louis Sohn, and others. You have indeed become the premier center for the study of international law in our region, and indeed one of the leading institutions in the entire world in this field. As we celebrate Law Day at this outstanding institution, the role of law in the world is under increasing and very severe strain. There are many threats, but one of the greatest threats is the spread of violence and the spread of terrorism throughout the world. From 1973 through 1982, there were 7,623 persons who were wounded or killed in international terrorist attack, including even Pope John Paul II. Some 3,509 of those were killed, and many of them were American citizens. When we look at the nature of terrorism, terrorism springs from many causes, including political, religious, or ethnic differences, poverty, repression, and real or perceived injustices. Sometimes terrorism is just pure criminal behavior that has been cloaked with political rhetoric. Usually, however, terrorists are desperate people, willing to undertake desperate acts to draw attention to whatever cause they are espousing, or to punish their enemies, or to accomplish some temporary or permanent goal. In a society of laws, in a nation of laws, on a day that we celebrate law in our Constitution, how do we begin to think about this challenge, and how do we cope with terrorism? On the domestic front, over the last decade, Congress has enacted a number of provisions which prohibit aid to any government which aids or abets terrorists. Even though these statutes have been invoked against some governments in the world, governments like Cuba, Syria, North Yemen, and Libya, they have regrettably so far had very little effect. The FBI in recent years has developed so-called SWAT teams to deal with domestic terrorist acts. And thus far, I must say that the FBI has had a notable record of deterring terrorism in our own country. We have one of the best records in the world in this country. We have improved our intelligence collection and coordination between the various governmental agencies that deal with threats to American citizens both at home and abroad. Since the tragic bombing that we all felt so deeply about and so pained by last fall in Beirut, Lebanon, our military, perhaps belatedly, is beginning to take steps to deal with terrorist attacks on our military wherever they are. On the international front, in the realm of law, the United States is a party to a number of multilateral conventions, including anti-hijacking, aircraft sabotage, protection of nuclear weapons and materials, protection of diplomats, the taking of hostages, as well as a number of regional agreements. But in spite of all of these agreements, terrorism in the world continues to grow by leaps and bounds. The ultimate solution to terrorism must come from an understanding that all nations have a stake in controlling terrorism and that cooperation under international law is essential. Unfortunately, that kind of cooperation is a long way off, it appears, and is very difficult to obtain. An act that one state believes is criminal terror, another state sees as a legitimate effort at self-determination by oppressed peoples. This fundamental dilemma can be summed up in the expression that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. When a radical Palestinian throws a bomb in a crowded marketplace in Israel, I have no reluctance of calling it what it really is, and that is terrorism. But much of the third world sees this as a legitimate act. I believe that the Afghans fighting for their independence from a Soviet invasion and Soviet-imposed government are struggling for their freedom, but one of the superpowers in the world calls them terrorists. President Reagan has called the forces fighting the Sandinista government in Nicaragua freedom fighters. The Soviets and the Nicaraguans call them state-sponsored terrorists. The dilemma and the difficulty is obvious. The United States must continue to work for international cooperation, but we must also, on occasion, well-defined occasion, we must be prepared to act on our own. Shortly after taking office, President Reagan warned terrorists that when the rules of international behavior are violated, our policy will be one of swift and effective retribution. Department of State officials have added that the United States will not pay ransom or release prisoners in response to terrorist demands or threats. And I think most Americans agree with these policies. Secretary Shultz recently said, and I quote him, "It is increasingly difficult and doubtful that a purely passive strategy can even begin to cope with terrorism," end quote. Secretary Shultz went on to cite the involvement of Iran, Syria, Libya, and North Korea in supporting terrorism, and he called for an active defense against terrorism, including the use of, quoting him again, preventive or preemptive action, end quote. I believe that the Secretary's statements and his concepts raise a legitimate point which demands our attention. I do not believe that the right of self-defense under international law precludes a limited use of force to conduct a preemptive attack against the threat of armed terrorism if, and this is a very important if there is a sufficient degree of certainty in the evidence available to us. The United States must, however, be very careful in the exercise of any such force and in defining our responsibility under the law. Our best minds, both in and out of the government, must carefully consider any policy which involves the use of these type preventive strikes. We are the most powerful nation in the world, the leader of the free world, and a nation which prides itself, as we're doing today, as a nation that serves under the rules of law and civilized conduct. We must not contribute to the world drift towards lawlessness by giving others an excuse to cite our action as a precedent. The role of law in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy has recently, as a matter of fact this week, been the subject of a great deal of attention both in the news media and in Congress. I'm speaking, of course, of the allegations that the United States itself is attempting to overthrow the government of Nicaragua and that the CIA has mined ports in Nicaragua. These allegations and the decision last week by the Reagan administration to withdraw jurisdiction of the World Court on the eve of a lawsuit by Nicaragua against the United States has raised very serious questions around the world as to the commitment of our present government to the rule of law. This past week, there was vigorous discussion of these issues in several sessions and executive meetings, including classified sessions of the United States Senate. Much of the debate in the Senate this week was on the question of whether or not this alleged activity violated our nation's long-standing commitment to international law. Many of us were concerned with whether the act of mining harbors in Nicaragua was a legitimate use of force in self-defense under the doctrine of international law or crossed the line into indiscriminate attacks on innocent third parties without notice. As you know, on Tuesday of this past week, by an overwhelming vote of 84 to 12, the Senate of the United States adopted a resolution expressing the sense of the Senate that no funds should be used to mine harbors in Nicaragua. On Thursday, the House adopted the same resolution by a vote of 281 to 111. An overwhelming majority of Democrats and Republicans in both houses supported this resolution. It's necessary as we examine this very difficult issue to understand that these votes that I've just recited were on the important but the narrow issue of mining. A few days earlier, the Senate voted overwhelmingly in favor of continuing support for activities designed to disrupt the flow of arms from Nicaragua to El Salvador. I was recorded as voting with the majority on both of these counts. Thus, the Senate of the United States has attempted to draw a line between those activities that it believes are legitimate and those that it believes are not legitimate, such as the mining. The question for lawyers, the question for governmental leaders, the question for all of us is whether the line has been drawn in the right place. Without any doubt, the debate will continue. As all lawyers recognize, the law has to draw lines. The law draws many lines. Knowing where to draw these lines is, of course, the essence of our legal system, both in this nation and in international law. And this is especially true as far as the importance and the difficulty of drawing lines in Central America. As background for this debate, just a few observations. It is important to recognize that El Salvador is the victim of armed subversion, some of which is supported by Nicaragua and Cuba, and that a substantial amount of arms and material has passed from Nicaragua to the rebels in El Salvador. It is important further to recognize the support of the insurgents in El Salvador by Nicaragua violates one of the fundamental precepts of international law, that one state shall not interfere in the internal affairs of another country. It is important to recognize that the victim of an armed attack, in this case El Salvador, has the right under Article 51 of the UN Charter and Article 21 of the Charter of the OAS to take measures in self-defense. El Salvador also has the right under international law to request assistance from other governments, and it has done this by asking for the assistance of the United States. As I read international law, actions taken in self-defense must be necessary measures, and they must be proportionate to the armed attack. Measures taken in self-defense may include military action against targets in Nicaragua if they support the insurgents in El Salvador. It is certainly arguable, and this is one of those debatable points that is enormously important, but it is certainly arguable that this right extends to the support of forces conducting military activities in Nicaragua, provided that the military actions are necessary and proportionate responses to Nicaraguan support for the guerrillas in El Salvador. Any use of the self-defense doctrine to justify armed actions within the territory of another state, of course, must be very carefully circumscribed. If our nation applies this doctrine too broadly, it would damage our relationship with our allies in the world. It would damage our legal standing and our moral credibility, and particularly damage our efforts to take a lead in the fight against the growing and raging terrorism in this world. Let us turn for a moment to the specific allegation that our government has supported mining of harbors in Nicaragua. Under classical international law, as practiced in the 19th century, mining would be considered an act of war and would probably not be done, at least legally, even in war, without a declaration of war or certainly notification or warning to innocent parties. Under contemporary international law, which has evolved since the 19th century, the question is whether the mining of harbors is a proportionate and necessary response to the Nicaraguan support for the insurgents in El Salvador. And it is here that I believe the arguments in favor of mining break down. Mining harbors which handle not only military cargo, but also third-party civilian vessels carrying non-military equipment is, in my view, not a necessary or proportionate response. Mining is, by its nature, indiscriminate. Mines cannot distinguish between Cuban vessels carrying arms destined for El Salvador and British, Dutch, Japanese, or even American ships that may be carrying grain or hospital supplies to those same ports. Therein lies the great difficulty. It was the indiscriminate nature of the mining, together with the perception that the conflict was escalating, as well as a very important omission, that is the lack of notice to third parties, innocent third parties, that caused our closest allies in the world, Britain and France, to sharply criticize this activity and caused both the Senate and the House to prohibit U.S. funds to be used for mining in the Nicaraguan harbor. Many in Congress this week were also deeply troubled by the decision of the Reagan administration to modify our agreement to the jurisdiction of the World Court. In my view, this was a mistake for two reasons. First, it has placed us in a very bad light internationally. How can we support the rule of law when we withdraw from jurisdiction of the court as soon as it appears that we will be the defendants? How can we seek to use the World Court to obtain the release of our own hostages, as in Iran, and then refuse to subject our own country to the jurisdiction of that same court? Second, on a pragmatic level, our actions are seen by the world as an admission of guilt. The world has perceived that we are pleading guilty in advance. In my view, a far worse outcome than if we had litigated and lost. In summary, the failure of high-level officials in our own government to follow at least the general precepts of international law, paradoxically, has generated world sympathy for a Marxist regime in Nicaragua that has brutally suppressed human rights at home and supported insurgencies against its neighbors. What a paradox. What a dilemma. The events have also created the recent actions by the Congress and also created the very definite possibility that the Congress may unwisely, in my view, turn thumbs down on the Reagan administration's entire Central American policy. So disregard for international law carries with it in our nation a very large potential price. There are many in this country, and there are some in high governmental places, who ask, why should our nation be held to high standards of international law when our principal adversary, the Soviet Union, behaves as a rogue throughout the world? Good question. Tough but very important answer. Can we solve the problem of terrorism in the world simply by adhering to and preaching the virtues of the rule of law? The answer is clearly no, we cannot. But this does not diminish the importance of law in our society and in the world. We in this country believe in the rule of law in the conduct of our domestic and international affairs. We do not follow the rule of law because we naively believe that we will set an example that the Soviet Union will automatically follow. We follow the rule of law because the law provides a guiding set of principles upon which we base our policy, whether foreign or domestic. We follow the rule of law because it is the very foundation of our alliances throughout the world, including but not limited to our alliances with our European friends, our Japanese friends, Australia, New Zealand, and others. Adherence to the rule of law assures a degree of constancy and consistency in the conduct of our foreign affairs. It also encourages, most importantly, bipartisan support for our foreign policy. Bipartisan support that in the last decade has been too frequently missing on both sides of the aisle. President Reagan and Secretary Shultz have recently been calling for such bipartisanship, a sentiment that I share. But I suggest that they begin by conducting our foreign policy with the principles of international law and our own sense of obligation under that law firmly in mind. The rule of law is ingrained in our concept of ourselves and our republic. We may be able to conduct our affairs, whether foreign or domestic, for a short time without regard for the law, but it always catches up with us in the end, as we have seen in recent years. The American people will not tolerate continuous illegal conduct. This is one of our activities, directly or indirectly. This type of conduct is clearly violative of international law. I ask the question to the Soviets, is this really in your own long-term best self-interest? It is often not possible to foresee the consequences of a terrorist act. The world must not forget that a terrorist act, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, triggered World War I. The global ideological and political struggle between ourselves and the Soviet Union is today superimposed on an increasingly fractious and troubled world, a world in which both terrorist activities and nuclear know-how are proliferating everywhere. There are an increasing number of circumstances that could precipitate the outbreak of nuclear war that neither side anticipated, that neither side intended or wanted, possibly involving other nuclear powers or terrorist groups or third world nations. This spread of nuclear know-how, equipment, and materials also suggests a rising danger of nuclear terrorism in the world. While the specific risk that in any one year, any particular subnational group or fanatical leader might acquire a nuclear device is no doubt a low probability even today, the cumulative risk covering all such groups over 10 or 20 years may be very great indeed. Once in the hands of such an individual or group, the potential for lawlessness would be unlimited, and the scope of disaster could be unlimited, including extortion, revenge, or an attempt to trigger a nuclear confrontation or conflict between the two superpowers. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee this week passed a resolution sponsored by Senator John Warner, Republican from Virginia, and myself, calling for the establishment of risk reduction centers in the United States and the Soviet Union to maintain a round-the-clock watch on any event which could lead to a nuclear incident. These centers would be designed to reduce the risk of nuclear terrorism, to build confidence between the two superpowers, and to avoid the buildup of tension and misunderstanding that could lead to a nuclear confrontation. My hope is that the adoption of this measure in the Congress and the proposal of this measure by the United States in arms control negotiations, hopefully that will occur, as well as the acceptance by the Soviet Union, will not only reduce the risk of nuclear confrontation, but also eventually, in an evolutionary process, lead to an increased recognition by the Soviets that they too have an interest in curbing terrorism and other activities that could lead to military confrontation. Even though the Soviets clearly do not follow the principles of international law in many, and some would say most instances, they do act in their own self-interest as they perceive that interest. Our principal hope for our nation and for peace in the world is that they will begin to see more clearly the danger to their own society in an era of proliferating weapons and an era of proliferating terrorism. I suggest that our nation and the Soviet Union start at the top by reducing nuclear risk with the hope of eventually working down towards a cooperative effort to reduce conventional terrorism. This is one trickle-down approach that I believe all of us could support. As the dangers grow, so too must the realization of both sides that in spite of our fundamental different form of governments, our total disagreement on human rights, and even our differences on following the rule of law in the world, we do have certain mutual interests. Certainly at the top of that list is the prevention of nuclear war by accident or by miscalculation. General George C. Marshall, later Secretary of State, said, "If man does find the solution for world peace, it will be the most revolutionary reversal of his record we have ever known." In an age of proliferating nuclear weapons and proliferating terrorism, our task is clear but awesome. We must reverse the course of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Nunn. Senator Nunn's congressional record and his message should inspire each of us to value our heritage, as well as to remind us that all of us must prepare for the future. We thank each of you for being a part of Law Day 1984, and we would like to invite each of you to the Law School Association luncheon, which will be at the Holiday Inn. Luncheon will be served at approximately 12:30. At this time, we will conclude with our benediction by Dr. Appleton.
Father, our responsibility is great. Our opportunities are significant. The drawing, the underlining, and the erasure of laws is a task most demanding. Grant to us that will to become all that we can be and to do all that we can do that the lines may converge in a world of peace. Grant to us precision in matters of law and grace, precision toward all and unto each alike. Amen.